The views expressed are solely those of the speaker and not necessarily those of Paltalk.com, AVM Software, or its advertisers.
News Talk is online. News Talk Online is a production of Paltalk.com, the largest multimedia interactive program on the internet with more than 4 million unique users on demand on iTunes and on YouTube, and also archived at my blog, GaryBaumgarten.com, where you can also see what I have to say about issues in the news and comment on them yourself. Whether you agree with the author or not makes no matter. And thanks to our friends at CRN Digital Talk Radio. We're syndicated coast to coast across the United States of America to 12 million households. I'm your host, Gary Baumgarten. Our guest today is Carl Moeller, our good friend from Open Doors USA, to talk about the plight of the Iraqi Christians. I'm going to get to that in just a second. But Alan, did you see what I wrote in the blog today about Comcast? You know, Comcast, ladies and gentlemen, is this huge provider of cable television in the United States of America. And normally with cable television, you're the one looking at the TV set. Well, Comcast wants to look back at you. I'm not kidding. Listen to this. They want to install a camera on your cable box that will allow them to determine the image of the people in the room watching the television. And then, based on the viewing habits of that image, they will recommend to you what programs you should see, and they will identify what products ought to be advertised to you. Doesn't this sound a little, Alan, JC, Big Brotherish to you?
Absolutely. It's very frightening to think of that. You know, again, Sylvia Lovejoy just wrote 1984, anyone? Ah, boy, that was the first thing that popped through my head. But, you know, it's funny that all of us who use the Internet, we deal with cookies all the time. And a cookie does the same thing. It tracks where we go on the Internet. It tracks what sites we go to. And it sort of accumulates that information. And then basically when we go back to our pages, all of a sudden advertising pops up on the pages that play back to what our interests are.
Yeah, I know, but that's a little less obtrusive than this. I mean, and you know, to think that they are capturing our images. Now they claim that nobody's going to use it now, and it's not going to show our faces, and I'm sure they will adhere to the high standards that the State Department has when it comes to the passport records of people like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, and nobody would ever open up those files to look at those. So obviously nobody at Comcast would pay attention to what my viewing habits are. Oh, wait a minute.
Let's not leave out John McCain also. I mean, these people also looked at his travel records. So three candidates, all three of them.
Boy,
it's really scary.
Well, to use a term that's often used by our good friend Don from Chicago, I find that egregious. Not so sure what that means, but it sounds good. Anyways, today we're here to talk to Carl Moeller from Open Doors USA on the plight of the Iraqi Christians. You know, ladies and gentlemen, Carl is a great friend of this program, News Talk Online on Paltalk.com, and I just felt, given the fact that we have the convergence of two events right now, that is the 5th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq by the U.S.-led coalition, and it's Good Friday, Holy Weekend, for Christians all around the world. So I think it's appropriate to discuss the ability or lack thereof of Iraqi Christians to pray, to gather, to worship in any large numbers in Iraq, and the intimidation of the Iraqi Christians. You may have heard that this past week the Chaldean Archbishop of Iraq was murdered, And for those of you who are not familiar, Chaldeans are Iraqi Catholics. And so it's not a good situation. And we're supposed to be bringing freedom to the Iraqis. And I think there's some indication that the United States has turned the corner and is successfully starting to change the hearts and minds of many of the people in Iraq, especially in the past year and a half or so, almost year and a half since the beginning of the surge. But have they been able to correct the mindset there so that there's religious freedom? Let's find out from the man in the know. He fights persecution against Christians all around the world. Carl Moeller, welcome to News Talk Online on Paltalk.com. Welcome back, and happy holiday weekend to you.
It's very good to be back again with you, Gary, and have a blessed holiday weekend as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So tell me, what is the situation, Carl, for Christians in Iraq? I hear it's pretty dismal.
Yeah, it's still a desperate situation. Obviously, Iraq is full of pockets of instability, although there have been some progress in some areas. Large portions of Iraq still are chaotic, and Christians are bearing the brunt of that. I just returned from Iraq early last month and had the opportunity to meet with some of our co-workers there, as well as some of our brothers and sisters who are internally displaced. That is, they've been chased out of their homes by Al-Qaeda, and they are living in, what can be described as refugee areas, villages in the middle of fields, and they are desperate. It's a very difficult situation for maybe several 100,000 Christians there in northern Iraq.
Well, my research tells me, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, that there used to be about 1.5 million Christians in Iraq, and now there are about 420,000. What happened to the remaining Christians that have left?
Yeah, sure. For centuries, Christians existed side by side with their Muslim neighbors in Iraq, and even as late as the 1980s, there was maybe 1 million to 1.5 million Christians in Iraq under Saddam. Of course, that was the kind of diabolical stability. They were not treated well under Saddam, but there was a stability to the country. And of course, if you were Iraqi, it was very difficult for you to permanently leave that country. But after the first Gulf War, we started to see a flight of Iraqis who could afford it, to flee to other countries and also to flee within their country. And after the second Gulf War began in 2003, we saw this situation really dramatically turn. And we now estimate that there are less than 400,000 Christians in the majority areas of Iraq. And that's really an incredible loss of culture to Iraq, as well as, of course, the dislocation that happens to the Christians themselves.
So how are the Christians